afternoon, everyone. Come on. It's only day 2. Where's the good afternoon, everyone?
Good afternoon, Alex.
We are so excited to be here with all of you at South by Southwest. And I want to start off by saying we don't hate old people. Just gonna put that out there. And we're really excited to talk to you all about our perspectives as Gen Z, the path forward, the way that we can really work to make a better country that is taking advantage of what is actually the most age-diverse society we'll likely ever have. So my name is Alex Edgar. I'm with Made by Us, who's helping put together this panel. And the reason why we brought you all here today is because something's happening on July 4th, 2026. Does anyone know? It's totally fair. I didn't know until recently. It is the US 250th anniversary. So that means our country has been around for almost 250 years. And as Made by Us, we are a coalition of museums and cultural institutions across the country focused on connecting young people with our nation's history. And we saw a gap. We saw there wasn't enough young people, especially diverse young people, talking about our country, its future, and how we can really come together to make a more perfect union. So we're here to really dive in on that. And before we do that, I want to play a quick little game with all of you, the generation game. So if you are a member of Gen Z, can you raise your hand? Okay, Gen Z represent. Love to see it. What about millennials in the crowd? Okay, I got some millennials. Love it. What about Gen Xers? Okay, I got some Gen Xers. Baby boomers. Okay, boomers, we love it. I promise, we're not gonna say okay, boomer. We love you all.
Safe space.
It is a safe space for all generations. What about any silent generation? Yeah, that's fair. There's too much going on. You know, it's too hot. Anyways, we're gonna dive in and do some brief introductions. So, Tiana, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello. Thank you guys for coming to our panel today. My name is Tiana Day. I'm the founder of an organization called Youth Advocates for Change. It's a 501c3 that focuses on amplifying student voices through the space of agency, leadership, and service opportunities. And we also do professional development for teachers in the classroom, allowing them to understand how to best support their students through leadership, service, and agency. Again, really facilitating trauma-informed spaces for us to turn our pain and our lived experiences into purpose. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm really excited to share some thoughts today on this panel. Pass it to you.
Thanks, Tiana. I'm Andrew Roth. I am 26. So upper end of Gen Z, and I'm the founder and CEO of dcdx. We are a research and consulting firm helping brands attract Gen Z. Been doing this since about 2020 and work with a handful of brands across industries like Spotify, Hinge, YouTube, L'Oreal. All of it focused on helping understand this generation, who we are, how we work together, excited to be here. Thanks for putting this together, Alex, and Made by Us, and pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. I am Dillon St. I'm 25. I'm usually in Los Angeles. Excited to be here. My work is really focused on storytelling. So I lead a creative agency called Team DSB, and we work almost exclusively with nonprofits and some brands to really think about how do we engage folks at the margin. So whether we use DEI or not, we're talking about diverse folks who are really leading in movements. So that's where we play, and I really discovered that as a teenager when I used to just create websites and do content, and that it maybe kind of unlocked this belief that when we use storytelling for change, it can be our most powerful tool, and it can also be our most powerful weapon as we think about in this moment specifically. So excited to be here.
I really love that you brought up storytelling as both a tool and a weapon, right? It really is, our media is the most powerful thing we have, and it really depends on who's utilizing it and in what way. And that's again why we really wanted to bring young folks together to talk about generations, especially ahead of the 250th, because as I'm sure a lot of you can imagine, most of the folks that are talking about what does it mean that America's turning 250 years old are on the older side, and are often not in spaces with young people like us. And that's why Made by Us launched this program, Youth 250, which is focused on bringing young people in the 250th. And we have 100 young people. I see one of them is actually in the room, Anatola, shout out. But we're really focused on elevating those voices across the country to really make sure that, generations are not left behind at what we see as a real turning point if we take advantage of it. But kind of playing on our, generation game here, I would love to hear from each of you about your experiences with older generations, because I know, as I said, we don't hate older people. So I'd love to hear like an example of a mentor or someone who's really guided you in that intergenerational perspective. Start off with Tiana.
Sure. I forgot to mention I'm 22 years old, so everyone talked about their ages. I'm 22. I founded my organization when I was 17 years old. 3 days after high school graduation, it was the rise of the pandemic, 2020, and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I had been that one disengaged student. I was not passionate about school. I didn't care about school. I didn't think I was going to college. And I didn't have resources at my school that really allowed me to feel like I fit in. So there was a lot of not feeling seen, not feeling valued, not feeling heard, not feeling loved in the classroom, which caused me to be very disengaged. And this is kind of the origin story of me being 17, turning into a founder of a nonprofit that now works to do the exact opposite. But being a 17-year-old, wanting to start a nonprofit, a 501c3, which takes a lot of paperwork. I didn't have any of the resources on my own. And I actually had an aunt who has been in the nonprofit space for many years, and she was able to mentor me and help me get that paperwork done. And so as I'm like leading protests and getting involved in so many different advocacy spaces, I had a lot of really great mentors who ended up taking me under their wing and allowing me to kind of learn under them from their experiences. So that's like one example of a really incredible mentor for me that if I didn't have her in my life, I wouldn't have the 501c3 nonprofit that I have today. And we're on year 5 now, but she continues to be an active board member for me. I have other mentors and teachers and professors and even people who I've just met at conferences who have continued to mentor me and helped me in different spaces like, accounting and like preparing an audit for a nonprofit, like these things that are very difficult to navigate without the lived experience. So mentors and mentorship in general, intergenerationally, have been so valuable for me. Also, my parents, like just being able to pour into me in the very beginning. They were like, I don't think you should start a nonprofit. Like, you're 17, like stay at home, like you just graduated high school. But after I was like, no, I'm gonna do it anyways. Because very Gen Z of us, they supported me, and they also showed me the right opportunities as well. So yeah, I mean, intergenerational collaboration has been such a huge part of my story and what I also hope to do for the next generation. I look at myself as like a big sister figure to those kids who I'm serving. So I think it's really important.
I'm glad you mentioned Gen Alpha is coming right behind us. I feel like Gen Z, we've been the young people in the room for a while, and now we're on our way out too. Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, it's funny. I think we're probably up here, all of us, because in many ways there hasn't been that intergenerational leadership, right? Many of us felt probably like we didn't have those mentors early on, and we want to seek that out ourselves. But I also think, to your point, all of us at some point have had that person step in our journey. I remember for me, when I was starting in COVID, we were kind of, I was doing this by myself and didn't really know what I was doing. I'm 21 years old, and had no clue how to start a business, run a business. And I had put this piece of research out there for our work. And I remember a couple days later, I got this DM on Twitter from the VP of marketing at Chipotle, and she said she wanted to chat. And I said, yeah, that sounds good.
I will definitely take that.
Definitely chat. But I bring that up to say I think we all need that first believer, that first big believer that's going to take a leap of faith, believe in you and believe in what you're doing. Maybe if it's not necessarily the most flashy or impressive product you have right now, but they believe in who you are and what you're set out to do. And I think all of us have a pretty special mission here in the pursuit of greatness in some way or another, and it's that belief that I think is so special for all of us that people recognize. And I think, again, for me, that intergenerational leadership, those people I look out for are the ones that take those leaps of faith and believe, even when that proof of substance might not be there entirely.
Yeah, and I think my ability to enter spaces like this is the doing of great mentors in my realm. I think, in particular, International Women's Day, I think it's all been kind of powerful women who are like, okay, let's do this. I see something in you. Let's make this happen. So I think back to my first professional nonprofit experience was when I was 19. So I was full-time job. I had a nice 401k in retrospect. I didn't know what that entailed, but in retrospect, it was a solid matching system they had there. But I really discovered what it meant to build something under her leadership at the time when I was the youth engagement strategist. And I think the success that I think she led with is, one, she really focused on thinking about, what she needed when she was my age. I think that was very much an intentional focus. So it was really a collaborative relationship. It wasn't a directive one. So I think that's a very powerful way as we think about what intergenerational relationships look like. I think it is that. And then I think what made the relationship so successful is that it also focused on essentially reverse engineering what I wanted to do. I wasn't trying to stay there forever. I wanted to build my own thing, and that also made a way to really build something thoughtful there that kind of went past me. And she ultimately became my first client when I started my creative agency. So that's really the power of just like building with the folks, because I think we often think about mentorship as a give and get or these type of relationships, but it's often a give and give. I was learning, she was learning, and that's really the power in intentional building across generations when done right.
Important point. And I think one common thread between Tiana, Andrew, and Dillon's stories is that it wasn't that there was, such a massive repertoire of proof of concept. It was people that saw a young person with passion and said, I want to help them out. I want to be there as a support system. And I think if you take away anything from today, especially anyone above Gen Z in the room, is that if you see a young person who has that spark, we all need to do everything we can do to help that spark flourish, because that, I think, was a commonality between all four of us, of having these older leaders who said, I'm going to put some faith in you. And I know for me, one of my favorite stories is I was reflecting a couple months ago, and I was thinking I could genuinely trace back being on this stage today even to the first high school teacher I had that gave me an opportunity outside of the classroom to speak on a panel about voting rights, which was something I was starting to do voting work on campus and in the community. And I didn't believe in myself enough to say, I want to go speak on this. But he saw that passion in me and recommended me to speak on this panel. And it is something, and I know we have talked about this before, it very much is that snowball effect. Mm-hmm. Once you have that first older leader, mentor who believes in you, it really can change your life in the opportunities and doors that are opened.
Alex, can I just?
Yeah, of course.
I think it's a great point. I also think that is the pivotal point in which if that person actually puts that spark out, you will never get back on that road.
100%.
Right? And I think that's the importance of listening and really understanding who you're talking with and what they're trying to set out to do, because you have the power as kind of that in that role as a leader, as a mentor, to both support and also to demolish, right? You can take someone's ego as a young person who's really looking for that, putting that trust in you, and just rip it to the ground. And I think that's recognizing the power you have in that situation is also really important, because I'm sure we've also had our fair share of no's, but they're balanced out by the yeses as well.
I also want to add to that is when you think about what words, as simple as it is, can do to people, it can build us up or it can tear us down. And there was a lot of people in my journey, even my own parents, like I mentioned earlier, who were like, this is not a good idea. You shouldn't do this. And Gen Z has this kind of rebellious spirit of you tell me no, I'm going to try it and see what happens. But I've honestly learned so much from kind of walking the opposite way too. But just think about how you are guiding people, and if you can turn your no into like a yes and, or like, you can share your own perspective while still making space for them. And I think that's one thing that I wish I would have had growing up, and one thing I try to make sure I do when I'm working with students is, how do I facilitate a yes for what you're trying to do and also offer my perspective, so you can kind of not hit those walls that I hit when I was in your position. Because really, like, the older generations tell us these things because they have experience, but you don't want to dim someone's light just because you might have not had that fire and that passion the way that they did. And so, yeah, there's a piece to that as well.
Yeah, and I think that, like, both of those points connect on why this panel is Gen Z versus the Gerontocracy, not Gen Z versus boomers against Gen X, whatever. It's, the people in power, right? That they're the ones who really have that ability to dampen that spark, to say that no, that can totally defeat a young person's confidence and belief in themselves. So I think it is so important to, recognize, like, it's not just, the older generation, it's the folks that really have that ability to make or break, especially a young person's career, their life, their passions. And I think on that note, I would love to hear a bit about, like, what is one thing that older leaders or even just older generations don't understand about Gen Z that you wish they would? How about Andrew, you want to go first?
Sure. So we get this question a lot, like, what is the biggest myth about Gen Z? What are the things that most people misunderstand? I had actually someone ask me the other day, if you could hit someone over the head with one thing you've said or written about Gen Z that you wanted them to hear over and over again, what would that be? I probably wouldn't hit them over the head, but I think when I think about Gen Z and one of the lenses through which we research the generation, I'm sure you've heard the term digital natives. Has everyone heard that term? I think it is the worst term out there about a generation, because I think it says nothing about who we are and what makes us us. So we did some research on Gen Z, and we figured out that, digital natives is not truly descriptive of who we are and how we work. It's digital captives, right? We are held captive by the technology we use every day. And I think that switch in how we view Gen Z has helped us to really unlock a lot of new perspectives about how we work, right? When we are trapped by technology, when we feel like this dream for connection that was promised to us by social media is now connectivity. Right? Connection is not equal connectivity. They are not the same thing, but we are now more connected to the internet than we are each other. And I think this idea of digital natives needs to be thrown out and replaced with digital captives, because looking at Gen Z through that lens can really help people understand, like, who are these people, right? How do we empathize? And I think you'll probably all speak to the role of empathy in understanding a generation, but get in the mindset of a young person, and that's where change will start to happen. And so I think it's a little bit provocative, so is the title of this session here, but that's the role we try and kind of shift in people's minds, is like, who are these people and how do we really understand them?
Love that. Dillon?
Yeah, I think what folks often get wrong about Gen Z is that just because we may question business as usual means that we're kind of questioning or throwing away all of the impact that has been done before. I think, we're often, I hear questioning from Gen Z of like, this thing is not working, so why are we doing it this way? I think that's an important question of, we're talking about, even a kind of a broken American dream around the white picket fence, a house. Like, that is it's a far away for many of us, and for me particularly, as I think about just my day-to-day kind of work. But I think in many conversations, I think there is a kind of point around Gen Z, like, wanting to, like, burn it all down. And I think often it is more so we are trying to question why it is this way and how can we create new solutions that really put sustaining our future at the core. This is very much about, I want to live in a better space. I want to maybe have a environment that isn't attacking communities, particularly communities of color, worse and first. Like, I think these are good questions to have, and just because we're kind of questioning, power, questioning what is happening, doesn't mean we're, disrespecting everything that has come before. So I think that is an important nuance that I often try to push back a little bit around how we frame that up about how we talk about Gen Z.
And I think kind of one theme I'm seeing with both of their answers is this idea of Gen Z being kind of systems adverse, right? Like, these are structures that we've been born into but we're not exactly happy with them, right? I've heard a lot of people over the past couple months talking about, Gen Z's the generation has the highest propensity towards authoritarianism, right? Like there's been these surveys done, and it's like, well, not exactly. I don't think, most Gen Z are looking to live in an authoritarian government, but especially looking at what's going on in, our government today is that so many young people have issue with the fact that, they've grown up during times that stuff hasn't been working. I love to set the scene with people when they're trying to understand Gen Z for the first time by saying most of Gen Z grew up Great Recession, right? They saw their family struggling through that. Their first political memories, 2016, right? They have never known a political system without rampant partisanship and the split in the discourse that we all know, we all have been living through it. But then there's also the pandemic. There's Black Lives Matter. There's so many of these pivotal moments. And that is really what Gen Z has only ever known. So I think with both of their points, the idea of recognizing that systems aren't working and the opportunity for older leaders to recognize how can we learn from these people that want to see systems change and really, rather than, dampening the spark, say, hey, this might be uncomfortable. This might be a change that I wasn't prepared for. But how can we start opening up these systems so that they can actually start moving? Tiana, what about you?
My message to the older generations would be, how can you create programs without centering the voice of the people that you're creating the programs for? If you're creating a program that you want youth to engage in, and you're not co-creating with young people, you don't have a youth advisory board, you don't have a young person on your board, you don't have a focus group in research that you're conducting with young people, how do you think that your program is going to succeed? Because we have a lot of isolated perspectives based on our own lived experiences, but young people today are living a different life than previous generations because of these things that are happening. The pandemic, different organizations that are coming up and, changing our perspectives. And one thing that I teach my kids is critical consciousness, this idea of using our reflecting on our lived experiences, finding motivation through our lived experiences, and then taking action in order to create a change. And I think this generation, Gen Z specifically, and Gen Alpha, who is also learning so much from, I think, the way Gen Z is leading, does really, really well. We look at our lived experiences, we use that as motivation, and we take action in order to create some kind of change, because it's so cliche, but it's like, this is our future that we're fighting for. We're going to be the next president. We're going to be the next doctor. We're going to be the next lawyers. We are going to be the people who are going to be serving the world next. So if our perspectives are not centered, then how do you think your college programs or your youth service programs or your fellowships and your internships are going to resonate with us if we're not at the center of what you're creating? And we want to be included in that. We love resume building opportunities and places to have mentorship and to learn from others around us. I think we're so used to learning from each other, but when someone who's older than us and has more wisdom than us comes to us like, I want to teach you and I want to help you and I want to be here to not only be a student but be a teacher also, be a teacher and a student in that sense, because we all have some kind of reciprocal value we can offer each other. I think that is my message to the older generation, how they can support us and really create programs that work for us and work with us.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think there's also a huge opportunity here as we think about, I think the biggest class that I've seen across generations in my own work is this, what I just call the speed to action. I think often young people want to find the solution quicker because we're dealing with, we can just point to the world somewhere and we can...
all that stuff in the news.
Yes. And I think so often, that has been the biggest opportunity is I think as we think about the movements of the past, as we think about the civil rights movement and the queer liberation movement and the climate change movement, there are all these examples of there is this constant push and pull that I think is so important for us to have. It's young people really pushing that we need action now, and it's older people being like, let's build it more strategically. And I think there's going to constantly be this kind of push and kind of pull, and I think we need that to actively build toward the next thing. So I think instead of like being kind of risk averse or even being like, I don't want conflict, I actually think that is a huge opportunity to think about, the speed in which we want to go. That is actually a conversation point that will ultimately be able to push us forward more strategically.
Actually, and building on that, I think right now, the Gerontocracy has a really important role to play, because Dillon's point about the kind of speed to outcome, right? AI is changing the way we our expectations, right? Now a generation is growing up right now with instant access to outcomes and no process, right? And so what happens when that is what happens, we forget like how to learn, we forget how to do these things, and so we're going to rely on older generations that have gone through the process to help teach us that and remind us of the importance of that. Because what's the cliche saying? The journey is the whatever. Journey is all destination, no journey, something like that. I don't know.
It's not the journey, it's the destination.
Thank you.
Not the journey. What are those?
This is what I'm talking about. We need the assistance of no. But yeah, that's where I think we're going to rely a lot on, especially and younger generations too. Gen Alpha, right, is going to critically rely on these Gen AI growing up, right?
And I think one, again, kind of theme throughout there is, the youth voice in this process is really important, but that's not to say, let's get rid of all the old people, right? Like, we need the older leaders, but we need them to really kind of be there to guide, right? The mentorship piece is so important. And I think one thing that I want to kind of like take out from what Tiana said is with youth voice, there's often a lot of things that organizations will do that are kind of like the quick fix solutions. There are a lot of youth advisory boards. There's lots of, kind of these youth voice spaces that aren't super intentional. So I think that's another thing that, as we're talking about this kind of generational dynamic, is that the intentionality behind a lot of these forces really make the difference. So you can have a youth advisory board with 100 young people, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to be making much of a difference unless those young people have agency to change, to do the work, and actually like impact what other leaders who do have that power can actually like do with their work. And I think with that idea of kind of young people influencing power, I'd love to get your thoughts on this idea of passing the torch, right? Like, I'm sure you've all seen lots of news articles and about this idea of how do we get older leaders, especially people in Congress, we hear that a lot, to pass the torch to a younger generation, because it's not just affecting them, it's affecting their legacy, but also the future of our country. So maybe, Dillon, do you want to share some thoughts on that, passing the torch? What do we need for that to happen?
Yeah, I do think there's a question I always, as I collaborate with folks, I think there's a question that I ask, which is, what intended impact do we want to have? Because I think there is always an assumption around passing the torch is that we have the same vision, and I actually think we gotta often step back a little bit and be like, is our vision the same? Is our shared vision a idea of a collective future, or is it an ego play? Now, that's for you to decide. So, but I think ultimately, I think stepping back there, I think is important, because my focus is very much building more equitable, creative spaces for more folks like me to be on stages like this and to be telling stories. That's my focus, and we're seeing powerful people decide that is not a focus for them. So I am not passing the torch. That's an uphill battle for folks like that are there. So I think that is a first question around, is there alignment? And now if there's not alignment, then we can talk about, okay, maybe it is time to take the torch instead of pass the torch. Now it's a different conversation.
That's a fight.
Right, so now we're having a little a tussle. But I think if we are aligned in some sort of shared vision, then we can have a kind of a conversation with reason about the role and the impact of passing the torch. Means that industry-wide experience gets passed along, that kind of organizational-wide, institutional knowledge gets passed along, so we can continue to build. So that if we're aligned, that's a much easier conversation, because the work that folks have done before is ultimately going to be able to sustain that. So I think starting around this question around like, what are we doing this for? And then ending with, if we're doing it for this, then it's in our collective best interest to build further and more strategically. I think that is really the unlock that I would say to that point.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I honestly think that so many young people right now are not worried about legacy and future. They're worried about today. And I think the idea that, we can wait, we can kind of do our process to pass the torch. Like to Dillon's point, I think so many young people are looking at taking the torch right now. It's not as much how following that tradition. And I think so many, like what we see in our research and what we see from and hear from talking to young people is that there's no time. Right, like the world is burning. We are, our friends and peers are dying. Like these things we're watching these things happen through every single scroll. And so I think the reason why we see so many young people kind of fighting against that is because it feels like there's no point in passing any torch right now.
Tiana?
Yeah, I kind of want to really build off what you're saying is, I think young people realize again, to your point, like we don't have any more time, and there's not really a torch to grab. Like I feel like the older generation is like holding the torch, like I'm waiting for you to get this degree and do this so I can pass you the torch. And we're like, guys, we don't have time to get the degree and to do this and to go to school for 5 years. Like I actually have to do something right now. And that's why I think I'm so passionate about like building student agency is like, what does it mean to be that next trailblazer? What does it mean to like pick up your stuff and say, okay, I can't wait anymore for everybody to get on this bus. I just got to drive. I got to get in the driver's seat and I got to press the gas and I got to go somewhere. And I feel like that is, it's a response to kind of what we see on social media. It's a response to how our parents move. It's a response to like our surroundings. It's our environment. Like I feel like Gen Z is kind of in this space of like, if I don't move, I will be stuck. So if I do move, I need to go somewhere, but there's nowhere to get resources from. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to fail forward. And that has always been kind of my outlook of how I like built an organization from being 17 and now at 22 and developing curriculum before I even have a degree. Like, because I know through my, again, lived experiences, what it feels like to be that student who is like, no one listens to me. No one understands what I'm doing. I would rather just fail forward and just like fall and like get up again and like fall and get up again because I'm going to learn something from that. And so I feel like it's kind of like reinventing the torch. Like, is there a fire that I can like reignite this? Like, is there a new lighter I can like reignite this new torch that I'm going to build up myself? Because I can't wait anymore. It's like the sense of urgency. And I think all generations feel that sense of urgency, but Gen Z has nothing to lose. We're young. We're like right at the start of our careers. We have little sisters and brothers to also lead Gen Alpha, and people are looking up to us, and people younger than us are looking up to us, but people older than us are looking down to us saying, you can't do it. So it's kind of like, well, let me prove it to you, because we have that confidence in ourselves, and we have that confidence in really, any kind of social justice movement in history. In history, if you look at any of them, young people are always at the forefronts. And so this is another indicator in this generation, in this time period in society right now, of change is happening, it's happening quick, and we can't wait anymore. We have to get on it today.
And you said nothing to lose. I actually think it's both nothing to lose and everything to lose, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And I think, as you can see from all three of their answers, there very much is that belief that, these positions and like even the American dream that I think Dillon mentioned earlier is not really even something that's in most young people's like view. Like they don't see that as, the light at the end of the tunnel is getting to, live in suburbia and have my little white picket fence and a dog and my 2 kids and, the nuclear family. Like that isn't something that most young people, I think just earlier today I heard someone say that the average age of a first-time home buyer is 43 years old. Wow. Which is a lot. It's pretty far away for us, and is only getting higher each year. And I think that's a really key thing, is that when these young leaders and obviously there's the four of us on this panel, but you could ask, I'm sure, a majority of young people that are, thinking about their impact and social impact work, and they'd probably all say the same thing of, the systems aren't opening up, right? There isn't that torch, as all three of you mentioned. The torch really isn't in reach to grab, and especially, I think one key aspect of this is, people are living longer, and also the cost of living in the United States. A lot of older people, it's not that they're I need this power, I need to stay in control, like it's the only thing I can do. There are a lot of people that are saying, hey, I can't afford to retire. I don't have the ability, I don't have anything to fall back on. And if you're having to, do that, you're not gonna care about us young people that are, knocking at the door saying, hey, please, what about me? Like, hey, I gotta make it to the end of the year. So I think that is a really key point of like, these systems are in place, and we, as young people, but also everyone, regardless of your generation, like, is that future even gonna be within? Is there going to be a future to begin with? I think it's a question a lot of people are asking. But I think for the three of you, would love, with these institutions, right, if, and it's a big if they're willing to make a change, if they're willing to try to let younger generations in, what would you ask of them? What would you tell them to really create the opportunity for younger generations to have that leadership, to really have the ability to make a change? Tiana?
I would say establish psychological safety in the workplace and or wherever the space you're trying to build. Psychological safety gets left out of a lot of conversations, and it's huge in this time of like mental health, well-being, like taking care of one another, empathetic leadership. It's so important that we feel safe in our bodies and in the spaces that we are supposed to be agents of change in. How do you expect someone to be a leader or to feel safe to speak their truth and speak about their experiences, speak about who they are and be who they are, if the workplace feels like somewhere that you're gonna get shot down the second you speak? I think there's a conversation that needs to be had about how to hold space for people and how to be an active listener, and to also like allow young people to take up space. I feel like in a lot of the leadership positions I was given, whether it was like a board of directors or like advisory boards or helping conduct research, I would almost make myself smaller in order to make room for the people who are like quote unquote mentoring, but people who have helped me really step into, I would say, like myself, like my true self, my true identity as someone who is like very confident. Now I'm very bold and I'm not afraid to speak my mind. Those people held space for me and said, hey, like this is not a power dynamic thing. This is, you are also a teacher as much as you are a student in this place because I'm learning from you. And so creating those spaces that makes young people feel like I'm a part of this solution and I'm important and I'm valued here. And my perspective is doing something to create some kind of positive change that people will sit here and learn something from, I think is really important in establishing any place that you're working with young people. And also, there's a question most people ask me, like, when I'm working with young people, like, what if I don't like the way that they're approaching something, or like, how do I discuss this with them? And my great friend, Aubriana, says, just talk to them like normal people. Like, we are just also people. Like, we are your colleagues, your coworkers, like your friend, like, and do your best to try and create that like circular relationship with someone. Like, see them as a whole person instead of just like this young person who's coming in here to disrupt things. Like, how are your parents? How are you? Like, how is your heart? And I think that space of empathy it gets missed in a lot of conversations. But again, establishing psychological safety, it's so important. It's so layered. And I challenge you all to also look within your own hearts and your own experiences, like what makes you feel safe when you're walking into a new community, and try to cultivate that same kind of environment for the people you're also inviting in, regardless of their generation.
Yeah, I want to draw out just that social emotional and piece is so important, because so often, and I'm sure all three of you could talk a lot about this, any attempt at bringing young people in is often just becomes tokenization. It becomes, we need to check off this box, and that's kind of just what you're here for. Like this cute little kid is coming up, right? I promise most Gen Z, not cute little kids that want to be there. They want to be active participants. They want to be part of that process. And yet so often, in order for a young person to get to the places like we are here today, it requires, I believe, like one or two things. It's either you need to sell your trauma, which I think comes up far too often, of you need to say these XYZ bad things have happened to me in order to even be allowed in a space. Or you need to have already come up through these very specific elite pipelines to find access to these spaces, right? It's, what type of degree do you have? What internship do you do? Who can recommend you to say, this is someone we want in this space? So I think, with Tiana's point, like the safety part is so important, but even like who's allowed to get to the place to even have that safe environment is so, so critical. Andrew, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. At dcdx, I have something I tell my team a lot, which is when we're trying to learn something, I ask them to go into the wilderness. It actually comes from Brene Brown, this idea of kind of wilderness being a space of true belonging. And for us, I think there's something so wrong today, which is none of us, we all lean towards certainty so often. The idea of uncertainty has become this like we cannot stand uncertainty. But uncertainty and kind of ambiguity is where the true magic happens. And so I ask my team to go into the wilderness in these spaces where kind of being able to be comfortable with the uncomfort, right? Being able to accept that there are things you may not know. And I think when we talk about inviting younger generations in, how institutions and older organizations can really bring young people up, it's this idea of first going into the wilderness and letting that mind space open up, and be open-minded and be curious, right? Because once you're open-minded and curious, then you can unlock some of the magic that truly happens from inviting people in. And so after we're into the wilderness, I think it's two simple steps. It's one, invite, right? Like make sure you're inviting that. The change is going to happen. Whether or not you want it to, you can run or you can face it head on. So invite people in and then challenge them. Like I think there's this expectation as well that, if we have to put Gen Z in the room, like then we have to, and we'll just follow the rules. But like they don't make us earn our spot. I mean, I don't think we should just be here because we are Gen Z. I think make us earn our damn spot, right? Like we are, help us learn, and we'll help you learn together. And I think it's those kind of combination of steps that really help to unlock a lot of the magic that can happen in organizations and transformation after really opening up, inviting, and challenging perspectives.
Dillon?
Yeah, I think the only way that we're going to usher in the change many of us seek is asking the question of what are we each willing to offer up? To me, I think this is, the list is including but not limited to your lived experience, your professional experience, your power, your comfort, your pocketbook. Like,
Money talks.
It's a list. But I think that is, to me, the big unlock here is I think we each can offer up something. And it's not giving up. It's not to give up this. It's because I think the presumption here is that if we offer this up, nothing is really going to be lost in the conversation. We each have our own piece of the puzzle. We're putting it into the, whatever metaphor, the
Pot.
Fire, the pot, yes. So I think, to me, that is the opportunity here, is each of us, this moment, I think, takes all hands on deck. It does take the storytellers. It does take the folks who are thinking about data and organizing and youth engagement. It does take all of us to imagine what we are going to do next. So I think that question, allows us to get to the next piece of this, is like, okay, we're each offering up this. Now let us get to work.
I think that's such an important point of, everyone plays a role in all organizations, right? But especially, I think, with this intergenerational piece is that, we're actually stronger when we're together, believe it or not. The more we actually are, breaking down those barriers and getting older generations, younger generations, people across all different type of positions and differences to actually have those conversations, and not in the stereotypical bridge building way, but in like how can we actually make this shared impact that we're here for, that we have that shared value around. So I think that is such an important point. And in just a few minutes, we're gonna have time for questions. So start thinking. Would love to hear some stuff. And I think the last thing that I want to ask each of you is, and this is kind of like a broad question, but if you could snap your fingers, wave a magic wand, whatever, and change one thing that would have made your journey to where you are today easier as a young person in spaces that, traditionally aren't very friendly to younger voices? Is there that one or two things that you think could have made your journey so much smoother? Tiana, you want to?
Yeah, I can start. I would say mine would start in the classroom. And or at home. Like, the home is also a first classroom for every child. But a place that, again, is like co-created with the student, and centers the student and child, understands from an empathy perspective, from a heart posture perspective, like what is the kid going through? How are these day-to-day experiences affecting the kid on a day-to-day basis? Like questioning and being curious, like Andrew said, about the things that students are going through, because they still have things. I think of my teenage self who was seen as very rebellious, or the outcast, or very disengaged. And I've been journaling since I was in 7th grade, and so I can go back to my journals and read them and kind of put myself back in the shoes of me at 14 or 15. And I was so emotional because of all of the hormones the kid is going through, right? And so now when I'm working with high schoolers, I have this other lens of empathy of, you are going through so many things that I have already accomplished, and I can't forget to not put myself back in those shoes, even though it was a few years ago. But I wish my parents could do that, when I was having my moments, and I wish they could remind themselves when they were my shoes. And now I have 2 little sisters. I've always had 2 little sisters, but my parents often ask me for advice. How do I talk to her about X, Y, Z? And I'm like, put yourself in her shoes. Do you remember when you were 16 and going through your first breakup? Do you remember how chaotic that is, and how you're feeling feelings for the first time? Can you remember the humanity aspect to it? And I think that's a tip for all people of all ages, but especially with adults working with young people or wanting to include younger generations into a conversation, is can you remind yourself when you were in their position, their shoes, what did you need, and how can you make sure that you are a great mentor and give that assistance to them? I have so many mentors who are I remember when I was 22, I would have loved to be a part of something like this. It would have helped my career, would have helped my resume. I'm gonna now put you in that position. And opportunities like that have been the reasons why I can be here at South by Southwest, or have been able to be a co-author of research before, I'm even graduated from high school. From college. There's just different resources and opportunities that you can offer somebody when you have the lived experience, and inviting them in that conversation is so special for the young person, but I think it can also be such a special moment for you as the mentor, because you can see your inner child related to what they're going through as well. And so I definitely encourage that shared space and that openness and that vulnerability of I'm just like you at the end of the day. I've been in the same position, and because of that, I'm going to lift you up because I needed this.
That was really beautiful, Tiana. Thank you. Andrew, Dillon, either?
What I wish I saw a bit more of when I was entering the space is just more examples of what activism can be. I think for me, activism often has looked like the bullhorn. Oh, that's cool. It's I'm so that's not me. I'm not a bullhorn type of guy. I want to tell the story. So I think if I had more examples of the folks who are also critical to movement, which are storytellers and creatives and writers, we all, to the point we made earlier, we all have a role in this, and I think it's very important for us to underline and emphasize that to particularly young folks who can, I'm recruiting creatives all the time in this space. There's a ton of opportunities to really think about how can you use your creativity in order to help usher in powerful global movements. That is a thing that folks can do, and there needs to be more narrative storytellers leading that work. So if we can really showcase really the power in that work, that is really where I would love to see more in this realm.
Awesome. Andrew?
You're probably not going to like this answer, but I don't think anything should have been easier. I think we're all here because it wasn't easy, right? And there's a reason we're up here on the stage, because we fought through that. And I think the idea that trying to make things easier for a younger generation is not what we should be encouraging, right? It is so easy right now. You can go up, pull up ChatGPT, and you just solve the world's questions, right? Make it hard. Like, don't try and remove every single barrier, but also make it accessible, right? Like, if it can't, you have to dangle that carrot for long enough to make it within reach. But if you just hand the carrot to them, they're just going to take it, right? So I think it's the idea that, like, make sure to challenge people and make sure to challenge young people. That's how we're going to learn. That's the thing that's going to prevent us from just becoming AI bots all in the future, right? It's that process and that journey. And so.
Hey, I think that's totally fair. There is so much that you do have to experience. You can't just be put in a position, because you're not going to be a good leader, a good person in whatever role you're in, unless you have actually earned it, experienced those things. So I appreciate that. I see we already have people lined up for questions, so would love to open the floor to some Q&A. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm too big. I'm Eva from Germany, and of course, everyone is looking at the US right now. And when I heard you saying we don't have time, the world is burning and everything, these kind of things, and you don't have patience, and I totally understand that. Do you feel that these problems are addressed in a proper way at this conference here? So to me, it feels like too less people are talking about that. I felt like this should be a space, or could be a space, to maybe even organize protests and these kind of things. So do you feel that this is enough of a topic here? And or do you see anything positive, anything that makes you optimistic about politics in the US right now?
Just, a super easy question.
Good one.
We're done. Anyone want to take the...
I can start to the point of this conference I'll touch on it. I haven't seen, so I was here for South by Southwest EDU, and now I'm here for South by Southwest, and I really haven't seen that many Gen Z led panels. I haven't seen any besides this one. Maybe I'm not looking hard enough, but I do think that should also spark another layer of the conversation. Why aren't young people up here, other young people up here, leading panels? I know Alex was the one who applied to get this panel, like kind of what that process looks like to get a panel at South by Southwest. But it's like, do these people feel empowered to even do the application process, or like show up to these spaces? Do they have resources? Do they have access? How can we create these spaces in these places of like conferences and gatherings and convenings that bring people in from all over the world and invite those conversations to happen with Gen Z? I don't think we're receiving that information or knowing that that's available. So I can touch on that part. I'm gonna have to throw the question to somebody else though. After that.
I think it seems like you were leaning a little bit more political with the question, and I think what I was talking about earlier. I think we have, as a culture, have grown too comfortable with the idea that we can't talk about those things, right? I think it's probably absent because we don't know how to have those conversations together in a way that's productive. And so I think it probably isn't being talked about here because we just don't know how, and we've forgotten how to have like a productive conversation, how to challenge each other's ideas and not each other's who we are. Yeah. And I think like until we figure that out, nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
I meant the rest of the conference also. Not only you, but do you feel the rest of the conference is discussing that in a way that you feel?
Right. I mean, that's right. I think that's what I'm saying is that I don't think we're at a spot culturally where like we're okay as a society having those conversations together, and we should. We need to be able to accept that and accept different beliefs, but we can't. And that's where we are today.
All right. Thank you so much for that question. Next.
Hi, I'm Deb Whitman, 54, Gen X, and I'm policy and research at AARP. So I wanted to thank you. I was a little bit worried about the title, but the way, Alex, you have arranged this. It's just been a really great conversation, and I've learned a lot. I think digital captives is one of the notes that I took away from it. I think you talked a lot about learning between generations, and what's the most important lesson that you think younger generations can teach older generations today? How can we have learning go both ways?
I think that fearlessness and the break out of the box approach to life that a lot of young people have. I even learned this from like my younger sisters. I think my parents' generation, who are also Gen X, and older generations have kind of like a structured view of how things should be or how systems have always been in their lives. And I think the truth is, our lives have been so disruptive since we've been growing up in this time of like post-pandemic and just the economy, the world, like the politics right now. Like it looks so different, and we're kind of losing I feel like the structures are dissolving almost for this generation. And so we have to be those trailblazers, you know, we have to like break out of the box, and we're very innovative. And I think one thing that I'm learning, again, like from Gen Alpha, and I learned from my Gen Z peers, is how to be innovative and how to think outside the box and redefine things. Like I was a part of this research study that was redefining youth service with the Allstate Foundation, and it took 40 different people from across the nonprofit and the education sector, where people have been in nonprofits or organizations represented for over 100 years were there. And then it was like me, a founder of an organization that's only been open for 5 years, and also teachers and educators. Like it was a collaborative space that allowed us to look at the research from a different perspective, from different perspectives, honestly. And I think one thing that we brought to the table, because Alex was a part of that conversation too, was like, how do we just completely reinvent this wheel? Like this system is not working for us anymore. And is there a way we can be innovative and use our new resources, use creativity to actually shift this narrative and make it more centered to what the actual problem is? And I think Gen Z is really good at doing that.
Yeah, I really think the biggest thing that Gen Z can support other generations with is the audacity to do. I think I am, you know, my first 2 full-time jobs in nonprofit spaces were done because I cold emailed those folks. I did the work before that, but I did cold email those folks. I designed my own role. So I think that kind of piece around, like, why not? Like, we're gonna decide to do that. We're just gonna try it out. So I think to that point is this kind of audacious energy, I think, is what has been like the biggest reflection of. And I think that is also, I've led intergenerational teams, and that kind of spreads across all the different things. And I think that is a really powerful way to lead and build teams with, is that energy.
Yeah.
I'll just add one quick thing. I would recommend a book called Think Again by Adam Grant. I just think it's a very appropriate book right now. And if you're trying to learn how to work with a generation and understand a generation that thinks very, very differently, that's the place to start.
Thank you again for a great panel.
No, thank you for coming. Next question.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. As a younger millennial, I was very much like most of y'all as a very young leader, and because leaders gave me space. And I think about that, and I realize that it's a little bit rare. So good for you for persevering, and good for your leaders for giving you some empowerment. I think one of the things that I learned through my 20s and just kind of the angst of it was I got really tired of always reacting to what is already existing. And I think you've touched on this a little bit of like, all these systems are failing us. But I wonder, I think you've, again, alluded to like being exhausted from responding to this thing that somebody else broke, like a prior generation. Like now we've inherited it, now we have to solve it. This really sucks. So I kind of want to ask you a little bit about creative imagination. And if you were to set aside trying to fix other people's problems, what is the future that you want to build? And I also, just a word of, what I have learned is that kind of the audacity that we're seeing with the current administration, you can't actually do anything. Like you can call things into being that didn't exist, and the spotlight, like the eye of Sauron, will move, and you can create this new energy, right? So I just want to hear a little bit about that from you.
Thank you so much for that question. We have like 1 minute left, so if each of you want to like a short little tidbit.
Cool. I'll go quickly. I think as a generation that is facing a loneliness epidemic that is incredibly important to us and our peers, the pursuit of kind of building a more connected world is something I think is so important to all of us. That it's funny, like right now it is trending to have like brands be working IRL. It's just like, yeah, that should be the standard, default, normal. But now it's back and it's cool again. But I think that's what I would push is like, how can we create a world where people are meeting each other, getting out of their houses and talking again?
I would say, again, like, bring back community, like, center, like, are we going outside? Like, do we have parks? Like, you know, like, what is the experience of communities these days? To me, there's not much. And so what does it look like to kind of bring back together this, like, warm feeling of, like, meeting new people is a fun thing, and, like, you know, bumping into a stranger or, like, seeing someone at the grocery store you know and saying hi to them? Like, that's not something this generation really does. Like, I want more warmth. I want more community, and I want kind of this, just warmth, like warmth from people, kindness, leading with love. Is that cheesy? But like,
Beautiful.
I think that's like my dream, and I start with kids because I'm like, you guys can do it. Like, be kind.
Well, I don't know about y'all. I've learned a lot from the three of them in this conversation today. And just to pick out a couple key points before we wrap up, you know, regardless of what generation you're in, thinking about young leaders, thinking about mentorship, but not, you know, giving just the easy pass. But I think, as Andrew mentioned, you know, how can we support challenging young people so that their, you know, spark turns into that flame? So really finding those new ways, pathways to show young leaders the path, but also, as I think this final question really, you know, astutely brought up, building that like safe community, the ability for people to come together. And I think one of the biggest things I always hear is we feel our best selves are just we feel most connected when we're offline, right? When we're in person, when we're not stuck online. So I think especially a lot of older leaders think, you know, young people, they're just online. They want everything to be virtual. And it's like, no, like, please bring us in person. Let us meet, let us talk, let us connect. Yeah. So the more we can do that, create those spaces that enable those conversations and moments and really open up the leadership pipeline for more younger leaders, the better. So with that, thank you all so much for coming. This has been a pleasure. And thank you, Tiana, Andrew, and Dillon for being on the panel.
Yes. Thanks for having us.